All right, this is Psalm 103, verse 19. The Lord has established his throne in heaven, and his kingdom rules over all. Bless the Lord, you his angels, who excel in strength, who do his word, heeding the voice of his word. Bless the Lord, all you his host, who minister of his, who do his pleasure. Bless the Lord, all his works, in all places of his dominion. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Father, we do pray that as we come together today, that it would be pleasing to you, and that it would be a blessing to you, and that you would bless us as a result of this time studying your word. And it's in Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. All right, well, let's see. We've spent a fair amount of time in Genesis chapter 19, all about Sodom and Gomorrah, and we'll finish that today. May or may not start chapter 20. I don't know. But a couple of things that I just wanted to quickly discuss and remind everybody about so far is, one of them is don't forget, every time in the Bible where we see evidence of God's judgment or wrath, or even the prediction of it, hey, if things don't get better, this is what's going to happen. Don't forget that there's always God's mercy and grace and his forgiveness. They always go together. Okay, and as you read your Bible, when you see anything around God's judgment or God's wrath, you should also look for really nearby signs of God's mercy and forgiveness and grace, and that's the same thing in life. I mean, because that's God's nature. He doesn't wish that any should perish. He wants all to come to know him through his son Jesus, and so he's a righteous God, and yes, he's going to measure out judgment at the appropriate time, but he's also a graceful, merciful, loving God. Also, we're seeing it a little bit. We've only talked about it some, but if you've noticed, every time that people have chosen sin so far in Genesis, and it doesn't really matter what their relationship is with God, so believers or not, the faithful or not, there's consequences. There are consequences for sin, and we need to understand that and to recognize that. Now, last time we talked about Lot, and we talked about his comments around offering his daughters to the mob instead of his two visitors. We noticed that he even while the angels are urging them to leave, they had to grab his hand to remove him and his family. That even when he gets out of town and they're telling him, rush to the mountains, remember he has to negotiate to take the time. He negotiates that he wants to stay in a small town. Please don't send me to mountains. And if you thought about it, it didn't really seem to make any sense. And we talked about the fact that times it's hard to distinguish the difference between Lot and the Sodomites, or certainly it is for me. I mean, I struggle with it at times, and I think everybody does, quite honestly. And if you remember, I mentioned you can go and look in the commentaries and the scholars and what they've written about it, and many of them come up with some really, I think, pretty extreme ways to try to exonerate Lot and his questionable approaches and the way he handles things. And I think it's because they too have a hard time distinguishing. I think it's because, quite frankly, there's not that much difference. I mean, there's some, but there's not much. And the bottom line is that Lot's a sinner, and he's saved by faith, a faith from God that credits him with righteousness. It's not that any or some of Lot's actions have saved him. In fact, his actions and his statements indicate that the sin of Sodom has infiltrated his life, that he's been strongly influenced by living so closely, by being a complete part of that environment. And I think that that's one of the real messages to get out of this chapter. In fact, we've talked about the fact that clearly there's a demonstration of God's judgment and God's salvation here. But there's also a message around the fact that God will not pour out his wrath on the wicked until the righteous are saved. And we've talked about how that's a foreshadowing of the tribulation with the rapture. And we've talked about the fact that we can see differences in the life of Abraham and Lot because of the choices that we've made and the consequences that come from those choices. Okay? And so we should be looking through this chapter and also comparing it to Abraham. Now that's going to be interesting because next week, when we get to chapter 20, we see another aspect of Abraham that's not really all that great. I mean, he comes off not looking like the true man of faith, and so we'll talk about that next time. Okay, but my point is that there are consequences and there are differences. Okay, and there are consequences even for believers who compromise with sin or find themselves deeply involved in the world. And don't forget, remember, some time ago now, we studied some portions of the New Testament around what's it look like to live life of a Christian. And remember in 1 John chapter 2, verse 15, John wrote, "Do not love the world nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him." And
so I have a question about that.
Yeah.
I mean, to not love the world, but we still are called to love our neighbors.
Sure.
I love the beauty of the world, so that's the world, but I don't think that counts as being of the world.
He's talking the
So
world system.
Like just to not be involved in like all this war shit that goes on every day, and I mean, that's what troubles me. I don't know what I don't know if I'm really away enough from the world. I try to be, but
he's talking about the world system. Don't be of the world system. Don't get sucked in. Okay? There's nothing wrong with calling evil evil.
Okay.
Okay? Don't be a part of the world system. And I think we see that really clearly here in chapter 19. Lot's a part of Sodom. He's sitting in the gate. He's one of the judges. He's one of the elders. And yet he loves Sodom. He doesn't want to leave Sodom. And yet he knows God, and it doesn't bother him what's going on. He just doesn't want his visitors to be a part of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, kind of.
I remember last time we talked about why does God judge Sodom? And we mentioned the fact that
it was so far over the edge. It was they were so bad.
Well, remember, we said that the Bible has actually 6 reasons for it. In God himself in chapter 18, it said that their sin was really, really great. And the word that he used there is often used to imply habitual sin. Okay? Isaiah chapter 3 talked about the fact that it was arrogance. Jeremiah chapter 23 said that they encouraged increasing sin until none could repent. Okay, in other words, they were feeding on each other. Okay, nobody was standing up and saying, "Hey, that's wrong." They were actually, "Oh yeah, that's great. You do it. It's not for me, but you do it. Go for it." Right? You do what you want. Hey, if it's right in your eyes, it's okay.
That just sounds exactly like the world today.
It does. Man hasn't changed. That's one of the messages of the Bible. The nature of man, unless you become a believer indwelt by God's Spirit, the nature of man doesn't change. That's why Paul talked about an old nature and a new nature. Okay, that Ezekiel points out that there was a complete lack of compassion for the needy, that they were a very, very wealthy region, and they didn't care about anybody. Jude, in verse 7, talked about their gross immorality. And in 2 Peter chapter 2, he said that Sodom was an example of the destiny of unrepentant sinners. Okay, so it's not as simple as we sometimes would like to make it out to be. And I'm not sure that should be surprising, given the complexities of God and His righteousness. You know, it makes sense that there would be multiple reasons. Okay. Now, where we left off the story last time, remember that Lot, as I said earlier, has been, he's been taken, he's been led. I mean, literally, we read that the angels took them by hand and delivered them out of the city. And then he begged to go into a small town, and it was Zoar, okay, rather than the mountains. And by this point in time where we dropped off in the scriptures, it's just Lot and his two daughters. What happened to his wife?
Well, I remember, when you said it says she looked back, but that's not really like she had to turn her head and look back. It's just that she longed for it, or that's where she really wanted to be, and she didn't want to leave. Yeah,
and so she became a pillar of salt, like you said, Marie. And so, so she completely disobeyed the angels, because the angels told them, "Hey, don't be longing for this place. Okay, don't be worried about it. Don't be concerned about it. Now you can have, compassion for those sinners." And that's, God calls us to be praying for them. And we saw that in the previous chapter when that's exactly what Abraham was doing. He was praying with God. He was praying to God that God would be merciful to the very least to the righteous that were left there. Okay. But it's clear that his wife really preferred and longed for Sodom, even as she was fleeing, even knowing that it's about to be destroyed. What happened to his son-in-laws?
Well, they laughed at him. They're gone.
Yeah, they left him. They're gone. And the part of the message in that was, one is a Christian can have such a poor walk, such a poor witness with God that non-believers don't believe him. When you come around and you speak about God, well, we shouldn't do that because God's word says no, and they laugh at you and they say, well, your life, you haven't done that. Okay. And so our witness and our walk with the Lord is really, really important. Okay, and we're going to see that even some more today. But notice also from the son-in-law's point of view, how many people in this world choose to remain in sin because they don't think God is serious about judging sin?
That's hard to say because we don't know what's truly in their heart. It could be like they're like Lot and they believe, but they just, want to be of the world.
Yeah, but you can hear what the world says. He's a loving God. He wouldn't send anybody to hell.
Yeah, no, they're crazy.
No, I mean, my point is this attitude of his son-in-laws is prevalent all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
It's very prevalent in this world today. And his wife, her attitude is very prevalent in the world today. A lot of people know, well, I really shouldn't be doing that, but they long to go back to that world, right?
Or the attitude, I'm not going to do that, but it's okay for you to.
Or
and I'm just,
Which was one of the reasons for the judgment, right?
Yep.
And so it's very, very relevant. And one of the things that we see as we go through this chapter of 19 is that it is incredibly relevant to this day and age. And the first time I heard this quote, and I meant to go look it up and find it for you guys, or video of it or something. I may still do it, but I forgot. The first time I heard this quote, I kind of struggled a little bit with it. Of course, I heard it 20-some years ago, but I don't anymore. Well before Billy Graham died, he was quoted as saying, if God doesn't rain judgment down on the United States, he's got a lot of explaining to do to Sodom. Okay, and I think that's one of the things we should conclude as we look through this. So, if you hear people saying, well, God's judgment is on the United States, I don't think there's any doubt about it. I don't think there's any doubt about it at all. Okay, now it's not fire and brimstone yet. Okay. There's many theories and beliefs in terms of why that is. I won't go into it, but I mean, ultimately, the other thing that we can see is there's not a lot of difference, okay, between what was going on in Sodom and the way this country is going.
Well, it's the same way in Europe, in France, in Denmark, in Germany.
Sure.
I mean, it's everywhere.
Sure. Okay.
Well, it takes me back to Romans 1, where he, leaves us alone to our own debased minds.
Yeah. That's right. At some point in time. All right. Well, that's all for catch up. Let's pick up in verse 30. And if you thought the story was as bad as it was going to get.
Oh, it gets really gross now.
Yeah. So, Maya, why don't you read verses 30 through 32?
Lot and his two daughters left Zoar and settled in the mountains, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. He and his two daughters lived in a cave. One day the older daughter said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there's no man around here to lie with us, as is custom all over the earth. Let us get our father to drink wine and then lie with him, and we can preserve our family line through our father." Okay. That's real twisted.
Okay. So, notice verse 30. So, Lot went up from Zoar, and my translation just happens to say stayed in the mountains. But the word for stayed here is yasab, or actually it's yashab, but anyhow, here it's translated stayed, but the idea behind it is dwell, abide, remain, or to continue. He didn't go up there for just a short time. It's not like he's on a walk through the mountains, okay? And he may, by the time we get to this part of the story, there may very well, because of this language, there may very well have been a gap between verse 29 and verse 30. It might be a couple of months, maybe it's a couple of weeks, maybe it's a little while, but the point is he's staying in the mountains, okay, with his two daughters, okay? And notice, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. Now, why would he be afraid to stay in Zoar?
Well, remind me, I can't remember what you told me why they call it Zoar.
Small.
What?
It means small.
Okay. Maybe it's because there are bad people there too, and he wasn't away from it all, and he knew he would be sucked back right into it.
Could be. I mean, that's a distinct possibility. What else?
Maybe it's because they knew that he survived the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and the people of Zoar would kill him.
I think part of it's because he just flat out was afraid. I mean, he saw that the fire and brimstone. He saw the complete and utter destruction of Sodom, and everything that he loved about it, and everything, and all those people and everything else. And I think he's worried that there's more coming. Maybe because Zoar is also evil. Okay, so he gets out of there. Okay. Now, as you alluded, Maya, he and his two daughters are literally the sole survivors of Sodom. That's it. Okay. And it's interesting because if you think back about it, and I'm going to make this in a humanistic form, so don't take it too far, but if you think back about it, doesn't it seem as if God had to work really hard to find anybody to save in Sodom? I mean, Lot wasn't exactly perfect. His wife doesn't even make it very far out of town, and the son-in-laws don't go. Okay, I mean, remember Abraham is praying with God, and he says, "Hey, you wouldn't destroy Sodom if there's 10 righteous left," and he stops there. It seems like God has to work, and work is not the right word for God. But I mean, you get my point. Is that it's not like there's believers everywhere. There's not like there's faithful everywhere, and it's not like the few that were there were particularly faithful. Now, I think that's a fair picture. Okay.
I wonder why God saved his wife, or tried to, because he knew what was in her heart. And obviously these daughters, I mean, maybe they have faith, but what they do now is just twist it. And I mean, obviously God knew it was going to happen.
Mm-hmm. So what's the point?
I don't know why he saved them.
Well, he didn't save them. The wife he didn't save.
No, the daughters. Why did he let them live?
So he gave the wife a chance to prove who she was, and it's an example to us. Okay. And I hold your thought about the daughters. We'll get there. Okay.
All right.
But my point here is, he really had to look hard to find anybody to save, and Maya, as you're alluding to, the people that he saved don't seem exactly righteous, right? But Jesus' salvation, I mean, sacrifice on the cross, that was a lot of work too. And we're not a heck of a lot different than Lot. So you see another pattern here, which is God is willing to work hard to find people worth to salvation. The sacrifice of Jesus was a huge cost. Okay, and without that sacrifice, without that incredible cost, there is no path back to God. There is no path of salvation without what Jesus did at the cross. Salvation is hard work. It's been said that God breathed creation into existence, but salvation cost the life of his son. Okay, and so we shouldn't miss that picture here. Now as we think back about this too, I'm trying to bring into a lot of perspective some thoughts here as we finish up on this chapter. But why was it that Lot moved to Sodom, and why did he have to move at all? Do you remember why that happened? What the circumstances were?
Wasn't it that there was not enough room and he wanted to?
Now it's a whole country, so why wasn't there enough room?
Too many livestock.
Too much livestock.
Yeah, it was their flocks, their animals. Like,
their herds, right?
Yeah, they were very, very rich.
They were very, very rich. And then so that's why they had to separate. And why did Lot pick Sodom? Looks, the fertility. Remember in
Oh yeah, he chose the better. I mean, wasn't it more fertile?
It was fertile, and it reminded him of Egypt. Remember, and remember, Egypt is a picture of the evil world, right? It always is everywhere you see it, and so he picks Sodom for these reasons. Now, what happened to his wealth?
It's gone now.
If you go back to 24 and 25. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the city and all that grew on the ground. Everything's gone.
Rocks are dead.
Everything's gone. What Lot tried to preserve and enjoy is now completely gone. How well did this work out for him?
Not very.
See, by choosing to be part of the world and enjoy the world, he actually lost everything. He lost his wealth. All the attractiveness of the world has been shown to him as to how God feels about it. He's scared of it now. Okay? He lost half his family. Also, think about it. He's living in a cave. He's not living in a prosperous, wealthy, well-to-do town. And by the way, God's got nothing against prosperity. Look how rich Abraham is. Now, while Abraham is simply a sojourner, that is, he doesn't have a permanent home, because he represents to us the fact that this is not our permanent home, that this is a fallen, cursed place because of sin and evil. Okay? So while he's a sojourner living in a tent, he's not in a cave with half his family dead and all of his wealth gone.
Why doesn't Lot go back to Abraham?
A wonderful question. Now, though Lot enjoyed the pleasures and delights of worldly Sodom, it's only for a season. See, when a Christian, a believer, starts to compromise with the world, God will let it go for a while because he'll give you the choices. There will be hints. There will be things in your life saying, let go of that, go back, get away from that. But in the end, he'll only let it happen for a season. Why? Because you're his child. If you're a believer, he's not going to let you go through this. It's only for a season. In the end, Abram, who walked faithfully with the God, ends up far better. And it's always the case. It's always the case, even if it takes until eternity to see it. The believer who walks with God, not perfectly. Abraham is anything but perfect. But he believed God's promises, and he's trying. Okay? And so we see the huge difference between the two of them. Okay? Now, what I think is really interesting is that that's not the biggest contrast between Abraham and Lot. While Abraham is not perfect, as I said, and he's walking faithfully, and he's making mistakes, okay, he doesn't falter in his belief of God's promises. We read that elsewhere in the New Testament. Lot, however, decided to be like the world. See, he wanted to be a believer, but he wanted to be like the world. He wanted to enjoy the things of the world. He wasn't, you want to go into the world? Okay. But then let people know in a godly, loving, caring way that what they're doing is wrong. It's interesting that that Lot, when he flees Sodom, begs to go to Zoar. Where is he now?
The mountains.
Where did God, through the angels, tell him to go originally?
Mountains.
Oh. He ended up where God wanted him to be. He didn't go. See, I mean, that's something to look and see in his nature as well. God sent his angels to protect him. The angels say, go to the mountains. And Lot says, no, no, I want to go to this small town. Well, isn't it interesting? He ends up in the mountains anyhow. He ended up going where God should have gone, where God told him to go, where he should have gone in the first place. So there they are, staying in this cave. He and his two daughters. All right, verse 31. Then the firstborn says to the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of the earth. How do you feel about that?
It's disgusting.
Okay, it's disgusting. What else?
Not surprised growing up in Sodom, but it's
We're going
an
to get to that in
option.
a second. Hold that thought, okay?
Okay.
Okay.
And,
What else? Even a little more simpler.
Well, they want to have a baby.
Okay. So that's natural. I okay.
Well, I think
It's a lie. God didn't destroy the world. He destroyed Sodom.
Yeah.
Didn't Abram pull together an army of 318 men just a couple of chapters ago to save Lot?
Where does it say? I'm confused that there's no man around. That there's no man in.
There is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of the earth.
Oh, see, mine doesn't. Our father is old, and there is no man around here.
That's it. There's no man on earth. And by the way, the better translation is on earth, because that's what the word really means.
Oh, okay.
They don't need to do this.
They just need to leave where they are and go look for a
That's
man.
right.
Okay.
It is a complete lie. It's a complete falsity. They're working on a false assumption. They don't know God, and they're going to take the situation into their own hands. Now it's interesting here, as they're talking about this, there's no record of them regretting the death of their betrothed husbands. This just doesn't make any sense. Now, admittedly, they're probably, like I say, hiding in the cave. It tells us Lot's afraid, okay? But there's something else going on here, okay? I mean, there's no man on earth to come into us after the man of the earth. And that's completely wrong. It's a completely false assumption. And this happens all the time. You see, people will frequently use false assumptions or interpret data and reality in a completely false way and use it to justify sin. Oh, well, that's just the way God made you. No, it's called sin. No, you have a sin nature. God didn't make you that way. Okay? That just because you've got a sin nature does not mean it's acceptable to do it. Okay? Just because you get angry doesn't mean you have the right to lose your temper. Okay? And so, Marie, you started to get at this. While his daughters faithfully followed Lot out of Sodom, maybe they're believers, maybe they're not, they were raised in Sodom. By the way, marriageable typically means late teens at that point in time. And we know from Genesis chapter 12 that Lot's been living there in Sodom for roughly 25 years. So they were born in Sodom. That's what they know. Their morals are shaped by the standards of Sodom, okay, not by a knowledge of God, okay. There was no understanding of evil and good. They're so corrupted by the world's way, they don't even see the evil in their action. When we talk about consequences, as believers, when we choose to live in the world, there can be consequences for those around us as well as for us. Look at what's happened to Lot's daughters. Now, if Lot had known this was going to come to this, you think he would have continued to live in Sodom?
Probably.
Well, I don't know.
I don't know. I would like to think that he would leave, but
yeah, I'd like to think that too.
Willing to give them to the mob.
Yeah, I don't know. Good point. Maybe it wouldn't have changed anything, but
I mean, that's right.
but you see the point, right? Sin goes far further than you think, and when you think you can play around with sin and keep a safe distance from it and not get burned, that's when you find after the fact, oh my gosh, look how bad it's really been. Okay. Now, the really sad part about it is it didn't need to be this way. How come Lot didn't have a conversation with Abraham around, well, you know, that looks like a really fertile valley and I could go down there and there's plenty of room for my livestock and then you'd be up here and everything else. But you know, we just came from a really worldly place, and that's a big, prosperous looking city down there. And I don't know why I want to go back to that. You know, and I don't know that I want you to go back to that either. But isn't there a way we can divvy up within the promised land?
Well, and the other thing, I mean, Lot already betrothed his daughters to people of Sodom and didn't seek Abraham to, you know, find a husband.
Oh, that's a great point.
Else.
Yeah, that's a great point. He didn't go to try to find a godly man out of Abraham's group or anything like that, right? And they've already been circumcised. That, you know, Abraham is witnessing to his people.
Yeah.
Verse 32. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, that we may preserve our family name through our father.
Okay, well, where did they get that idea that they need to preserve the family name?
So I'm guessing that's just a patriarchal thing that's been around for a long time.
Tradition.
No, I think their kid's gonna have living in a cave.
I don't know. That's a good question.
How are they going to preserve? Where are they going to find somebody else to marry? Are they going to sleep with their sons and have more babies? I mean,
I don't know.
Yeah.
Where did they get the wine?
Good point.
Did they take it with them?
No, angels wouldn't have learned that.
Was it so important they had to take it with them? Where'd they get wine?
Maybe they got Zohar and brought it with them.
Maybe so. Maybe so, but then you got to wonder, gee, it must have been kind of important. Now they might have been using it at first, you know, to purify water, okay? But
could they go down? Like, let me. Well, I mean, if they're living in a cave, don't they have to periodically go to town to get food and supplies? Like, how are they eating?
Well, see, that's partly what I'm getting at. Do they have to barter for the wine? Are they only living off of nuts and berries? You know, I don't know, because we're not told here, but it's an interesting thought, because if they're doing any of that, then they know that there's men. Right? Who would they be bartering with? So again, you know, we see that, well, they didn't have to do this. It was their choice. Okay. Now, where did they get the desire to you know, keep the family name going? Like I say, you know, remember that there's nations and and this was a fairly common kind of a concept and everything else. So who knows? But that's the rationale that they're using to justify sin. Oh, we have to preserve the family name. Oh, there's not a man alive on the earth. There's nobody nearby, and yet they know Zoar survived. I'm sure they suspect or know Abraham's still out there. Unless they're just literally eating nuts and berries, then they know that there's other people out there. All right. Maria, will you read 33 and 34, please, for us?
Okay, let's see, where are we? Okay. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. It happened on the next day that the firstborn said to the younger, "Indeed, I lay with my father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father."
Notice they have to make him. Let's make him drink wine. One of the things I noticed is, at the end of verse 33, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. How drunk do you think this guy was?
He had to be completely out of his mind, but then you can't really do that if you're that drunk. At least I don't think you can.
I don't know. I mean, I don't even want to go into that, but I mean, that's a really good point. Maybe Lot's not quite fully innocent here, right? Why did they?
I don't get how he didn't know they were his daughters. To me, that is beyond incomprehensible.
We're going to see this again, so don't get too wrapped around the axle yet. Why did the daughters feel that they needed to get Lot drunk?
Because
he would agree to it if he was sober.
Why?
Because it's wrong.
Because it's wrong. They knew it was wrong too. And they knew their father would object to it. Otherwise, they would have just gone to him and said, "Hey, Dad, Popso, we got a proposal for you. Don't fall over dead, but..." No, they don't. They know. They know. They know it's wicked, and they know he thinks it's going to be wicked. Okay? They knew Lot would object to it. They had to get him drunk. Notice also how it talks about the fact that afterwards they really regretted what they did, and they knew it was wrong, and they acknowledged it to God. No, there's no sign of that.
I was going to say, where is that?
I don't see that.
Yeah, I'm just making it up.
I don't see
There's no regret on their part. They're consciously doing something they know is evil, that they know they got to get their dad drunk so that they can do it. I mean, they're putting together.
Think about those two boys. Are they raised knowing that that's their father and that it was okay?
Well, I mean, I wonder what do you think Lot's response is when they show up pregnant in a few months? How'd that happen? Some bear wandering? We don't know. We never heard. But if there's no men around, if there's no men possible, what could Lot have possibly thought?
So twisted.
Verse 35, so they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose, lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Verse 36, thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. Like I say, you'd think there'd be something here about Lot wondering about this. Now, maybe it's just a detail that got left out. I don't know, but I just find it really weird. The firstborn, a son. The firstborn bore a son, and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. Verse 38, as for the younger, she also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the sons of Ammon to this day. Like you say, it's just sorted. What kind of family life did they have growing up? Just the 4 or 5 of them, whatever. Who knows how old Lot is? Lot's going to die. You know, what really happens to them? Do they boys know who their dad is? Well, I don't know, but the Bible clearly records the genealogy of these kids. Now, the Moabites and the Ammonites, interestingly enough, become long enemies of Israel for a long, long time to come. They are going to be true enemies of Israel. And all the way down to Moses' time and further. Okay?
Well, just like Abraham's sin with the Egyptian, I mean, it produced Ishmael, and they're still fighting to this day.
Yep, that's true. Now, Moab, later, it's the tribe of Moab, it's the king of Moab, later tries to get Balaam to curse Israel. What do you remember about the story of Balaam?
Yeah.
The donkey. That's where the talking donkey comes in, right? The king of Moab, the Israelites under Moses are coming through, and Moab is absolutely terrified that the Israelites are going to take their land and conquer them and everything else, as they've done to others. Okay, and he tries to get Balaam, the sorcerer, to curse Israel. Now the Ammonites were really cruel warriors with terrorist type of traditions. Okay, they were famous for their cruelty. Okay, but it's interesting. God has Lot in mind, and He has mercy on Lot. Ultimately, He has mercy on Lot, because these descendants, as terrible as they are, and as much trouble as they caused for the Israelites through their history, what do we know about the Moabites?
I know, that's what I was going to ask. Who are they now?
Ruth is a Moabitess.
Ruth came from them, and Jesus came from Ruth.
And Ruth is a great-great-great-grandmother of Jesus. I may or may not have the right number of greats in there. Okay, but she is a Moabitess who now you ask me, why does God let stuff like this happen? One, it becomes a clear story to us. This is the kind of stuff that happens when you play around too close to the world. Our perspective of right and wrong becomes so hosed up that we don't even recognize it anymore. And like I say, they might have been believers. Okay, I don't know that I'm necessarily going to be surprised if I find Lot's daughters in heaven someday. Lot's going to be there. I mean, Peter calls him righteous. Okay, so I have every reason to believe Lot's going to be there. What's another reason God allows this to happen? Not only just for the story, but to tell us, hey, there's consequences, and there are long-term consequences. Do you think the 2 daughters had immediate consequences?
Mm-hmm.
What?
Well, being single parents.
Okay. Oh, good. Yeah. And their dad probably dies off early on, and so they probably can't do it. So you think they probably had to leave the cave and maybe go find another town, mm-hmm. and they probably got involved in more wickedness. Maybe so. Maybe they had to finally marry because they needed somebody to help take care of them, to provide for them. Because women, there was only one occupation for women in those days.
Was that being a whore?
What's that?
Was that being a whore?
Yeah, prostitution. Okay. That was pretty much the only occupation. So they're committing themselves to a life of pretty significant hardship. Okay, not only that, since Moab and Ben-Ami go off and they create these two nations, these two larger nation groups, cultures, they must have left their moms at some point in time.
Yeah, where'd they find their wives and
Yeah,
etc.
they had to go off somewhere point in time. And do you think that the mothers noticed that their sons were going down these kinds of paths and becoming enemies of their own people and stuff like that? So
Does it ever tell you when these two daughters die or what they die of?
nope, this is it. This is the end of the story. We don't hear about them anymore. Like I say, it's the mercy of God that Ruth, but isn't that an interesting point? Because Ruth, we know, is saved. That's part of the whole story. You see, there were people, even though that as a nation, as a people group, the Moabites are against the Israelites and the Ammonites are cruel and everything else, there's probably a few that are saved out of there. And so we see God's nature yet again. That even out of this terrible thing, God can bring some good and does. Now it's really interesting, and you made reference to it, Marie. We've already seen this, that the troubled children, okay, in Genesis, end up causing long-term pain to Israel. Remember Ham after the flood and his son Canaan? Well, that's the source of the Canaanites and the Philistines. Ishmael is the source of the Ishmaelites. Esau, that we're going to see in the coming chapters, is the source. He's the father of the Edomites. Moab, the Moabites, Ben-Ami, the Ammonites here. We get to the end of this story, and I go back to something I've said several times over the course of looking through chapter 19, which is, man, by the time I get done reading chapter 19, if I didn't know what Peter said, how in the world could I ever believe Lot is righteous and saved? But remember, righteousness is attributed by faith, not by works. Okay? We also see something else from this if you think a little bit about it. Okay, particularly when we talk about all of these descendants from these troubled children, the Canaanites, the Philistines, the Ishmaelites, the Edomites, the Moabites, the Ammonites. Did you ever wonder why God told the Israelites to completely eliminate the idolatry, and even if that meant completely annihilating the people groups when they arrived in the Promised Land? Here's the reason. What's that?
Say it one more time.
Did you ever wonder why God, when he sent Joshua into the Promised Land with the Israelites, why he told them to completely eliminate the evil and the idolatry, and if necessary, even the people, the native peoples living in Canaan? Did you ever wonder about that? I mean, because oftentimes you'll hear it said, "Oh God, sure he's a loving God. Oh sure, he sent Joshua in there to wipe those people out." They mercilessly destroyed them.
Because it's like Sodom and Gomorrah. They're better
right.
people. It's God's justified righteousness.
That's right. Here's the reasoning why. We see the start.
Like cancerous tumor. You got to get rid of the whole thing.
We see how the Canaanites and the Philistines start. We see the Ishmaelites, and we're going to see more about it. We see here about the Edomites, the Moabites, the Ammonites. And what we learn is they started in evil, they started in sin, and that nature persisted not necessarily in every single individual, like Ruth, okay, like Rahab, okay, but in general across that people group. And it was a cancer. And God needed to get it out of there so it wouldn't infect his people. And the problem that the Israelites had is they never completely eliminated these people or their idolatry. And that's what ultimately led to their downfall. And therein lies another message for the Christian, which is, again, consistent with everything we've talked about, the messages and the learnings from Lot. You have to deal ruthlessly with sin in your life. You've got to get rid of it. You can't play with it. You can't compromise with it. Now, is that possible? Absolutely not. But it's the attitude. As God reveals things in my life that are sinful, that are wrong, I have to have the attitude as, well, it's not just a simple sin. It's not just a white lie. I got to get rid of it. Every aspect, every little thing, I cannot continue to play with it. The consequences and the long-term aspects of it are terrible. And that's one of the clear lessons that we see here. And God's going to get rid of it sooner or later. Now we can't finish this chapter without asking one simple question. If Lot's problems all come from being in the world, why did Jesus send the church into the world?
To save us, to show us the right way.
Okay, but so then why did Lot have the problems that he had?
Well, he's not Jesus. He sinned. Jesus was perfect.
Okay, but are you perfect?
No.
So why did God send an imperfect church into the world if Lot had all these problems? Well, at least part of the answer is this. Lot is Abraham's nephew. God's will for the Israelites was for them to be in the promised land. And as a nation in the promised land, to honor, to celebrate God through his will, through his laws, and reveal God to the world as a nation from the promised land. God's will for the church is that the believers in the church would go into the world, not be a nation. So we see God had two different plans. He tried to reveal himself to the world through nations. Okay, that didn't work at the Tower of Babel. So he calls his own nation out that he's going to build out of Abraham, for that nation now to show it, to reveal him. And it works for a little while, but really doesn't, and falls apart. So now, after they reject their Messiah, God's going to call a people, individuals out to create not a nation, but a church. Okay? Two different approaches. Okay? Both to represent God, Israel to represent him nationally in the promised land through the law, the church through the covenant of grace individually in the world. But the principle of not compromising with the world is there. That's why John gave us that warning. That's why there's many warnings in the New Testament from Jesus and from the New Testament writers, the authors, of, hey, don't compromise with the ways of the world. And this is a great story showing that. See, we started on chapter 19 by saying that the church has overly simplified chapter 19 and said, well, it's a story about homosexuality and how evil it is. Oh, sure, that's in there. But if that's the only message you get, you're missing it. And I think the greater message, and it's relevant to us today, to believers today, as well as it was historically to the Jews, was you don't compromise, you don't mess around with sin. You can reveal God, you can witness to God, but Lot didn't do that at the gate. It's pretty clear. Now, to his credit, when the pressure was really on and the crowds were at his door demanding that he give up his visitors, he did say, "Hey, don't do this wicked, don't do this evil." It's too little, too late. But he at least did at the last minute. Okay, but there is a clear message here. Hey, don't encourage sin. Don't mess around with sin. Okay, take care of other people. All of those reasons that we read about that the Bible tells us about why God, didn't want or rain destruction down on them. The habitual sin, arrogance, they encouraged people to do it. They had no shame as it grew. A lack of compassion for the needy. Okay, all of those things. Okay, so there's real warnings here for us today, across the board, and unfortunately, much of the church looks at this chapter and says, "Oh yes, see, it says right there, homosexuality is evil." Well, okay, but it says a lot more than that.
Well,
but why do then some churches say it's okay because they want to be of the world?
Clearly, they're not. Remember when we started this 3-4 years ago, this Bible study, something like that. And remember we talked about there are people.
Jesus' letters. Is that what you're getting at?
No, there's people when they read the Bible, look at it and say, "Well, it doesn't mean what it says." Let me tell you what it means. It doesn't mean that there's anything evil with this. That's not what this story's about. Now, I don't know what they do about chapter 19, okay? But liberal churches don't really teach the word. They're not in it, and when they do get in it, they tend to twist it to interpret it in alignment with modern thinking. Don't do that, right?
Brings up in my mind is J. Vernon McGee with Through the Bible Radio, how he emphasizes over and over that we don't get by with sin, that nobody gets by with sin.
Nobody gets by with sin.
You might think that these people are having a great time and don't have any consequences, and he just says, don't fool yourself, they do.
Don't fool yourself. That was, remember, that was one of the rationales. That was one of the reasons that they shouldn't have been, that they should be worried about this, and then why it's here. 2 Peter wrote, hey, that this is an example of the destiny of unrepentant sinners. That's what Sodom is. Because it wasn't just one sin. And by the way, sin doesn't travel by itself. There's nobody that has a single sin and that's it. Whether we talk about a community, an individual, or a nation, where there's one, there's more. The other thing is disgusting as the town's behavior is, as Lot's offer to compromise is. And by the way, who can be surprised with his daughters doing what they did, given what Lot was willing to do? I mean, there's a clear consistency. This is what they've been trained, right? But when we said that this is truly twisted and disgusting, that's the way God sees us.
Yeah, he sees the things that we do. Don't get proud because, well, I would never do that.
Yeah, that's right. Right? That's right.
I do worse.
So there's a lot here for us to learn. Now, I'd like to tell you that chapter 20 is better. And in some ways, I guess you could argue it is. In some ways, I think you can argue that it's actually worse. Okay? So next week, we start chapter 20. Any last questions or comments?
A question. Okay, so Ruth came out of Moab. Is there anybody like that came out from the Ammonites that we're told about?
I don't think so. Off the top of my head, I don't think of anybody.
Okay.
But I don't, and I thought a lot about this relative to Rahab.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that Rahab is the only one that was saved at Jericho.
Yeah.
And I don't know that Ruth is the only Moabite.
Yeah, there's got to be.
But they represent it, and they clearly I think part of the message is that they're a dramatic minority. Okay.
Was Rahab an Ammonite?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, all right.
I don't remember her
I
exact.
didn't know if any
She's
particular
a
person
Canaanite,
was
as far as I
pointed
know.
out. So
No, there's
Okay.
probably others somewhere.
All right, just curious.
Okay, Maya, anything?
No, I'm good. Sometimes it's hard for me because, I mean, I know Ruth is the one who took care of her mother-in-law, but I don't know who these other people are that you're talking about, so.
Well, like who?
Well, what was the name you said besides Ruth? There was another one that came out of it?
Oh, Rahab?
Yeah, I don't know. Who is Rahab?
So when Joshua comes into the promised land with the Israelites in the army, first place they go is Jericho. And they send spies again, but this time Joshua sends just a couple of men to really truly help spy out how to take down Jericho. And they're discovered, and the king's men start looking for them, and they kind of wander into this house of repute, yeah, whatever the heck the term is. I think that's what Popeye called it. And Rahab is the madam,
Okay.
and she hides them, and says,
Oh, yeah, okay.
yeah.
I think, yeah.
Okay.
I
So-
mean, like I said, you guys know the Bible much better than I do, and I can't quote the scriptures, and I try very hard to remember who these characters are, but sometimes there's just so many, I'm like, who?
Yeah. So Ray, I think that's part of the message there is that God does, even though these people groups are evil and they have evil starts, even if the majority of them don't come to believe, there are some that do.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Anybody want to pray for us?
Yeah, I can. Hold on.
Okay.
Dear God, thank you for this time together. Thank you for us being able to hear your word, read it, and then hopefully apply it to our lives and to learn and to show others. Keep us safe. Keep us away from the world. Help us to show through our words and actions that you are a loving God. Thank you for everything that I have been blessed with, because clearly I do not deserve it. Your grace is abundant. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Amen. See you later.
Bye.